An act of kindness to a stranded stranger in an expensive suit. One family's unexpected connection to the man who holds the deed to their generations-old farm. A struggling rural community's fate hanging on a roadside repair in the middle of a storm. This is the remarkable true story of how Ethan Mitchell's mechanical skills and compassion changed the destiny of his family's legacy and transformed an entire farming community on the edge of extinction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient alarm clock rattled against the bedside table at 5:15 a.m., though Ethan Mitchell had already been awake for nearly an hour. At 23, the young mechanic's face showed a maturity beyond his years, weathered by 3 years of struggling alongside his father to keep their family farm operational. The Mitchell family farm in Riverdale County had once been the pride of a region, 300 acres of fertile land that had produced abundant harvests for 4 generations. Now nearly a third lay fallow, the irrigation system failing, with grain prices at a historic low and Westland Financial's foreclosure deadline looming just 30 days away. Ethan pulled on his worn work boots and headed downstairs, where his father Robert sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the latest foreclosure warning notice with its bold red lettering. The kitchen, where they now sat in heavy silence, had once buzzed with activity. Photographs adorning the walls told the story of happier times. Ethan's great-grandfather with the farm's first tractor in 1952, his grandparents celebrating a record harvest. Ethan, as a child, holding a county fair blue ribbon for their prize. On corn, I spoke with Richards again yesterday, Robert said, his voice carrying the weight of multiple failed negotiations. Westland Financial won't budge on the deadline. Says the new management is cracking down on extensions. Westland Financial had been the county's community bank for decades, but its recent acquisition by regional capital partners had transformed it into an unyielding corporate entity focused solely on profits. Maybe I can pick up extra shifts at Morris's garage, Ethan offered. His mechanical skills had always been a secondary source of income, a talent inherited from his mother's side. Between that and the equipment repairs I've been doing for the Hendersons, we might be able to make a partial payment. Robert's weathered face showed a hint of pride beneath the worry. You're already working yourself to the bone, son. Between the farm and your repair work, you barely sleep. As they walked out to begin the day's work, Robert paused to look over their land in the soft morning light. Once thriving fields now showed signs of stress from inadequate irrigation. Equipment that Ethan had masterfully kept running years beyond. Its expected lifespan sat ready for another day's work. Your grandfather used to say that Mitchell's soil gets in your blood, Robert reflected. 4 generations have poured their lives into this land. Ethan nodded, having heard the family philosophy throughout his childhood. His great-grandfather had purchased this land when everyone said the rocky sections made it a poor investment. His grandfather had expanded during the farm crisis of the 1980s when others were abandoning agriculture. The Mitchells had always been survivors, innovators, fighters. But this challenge was different. 3 years of rainfall at less than 40% of historical averages had transformed the landscape into a patchwork of struggling crops. Riverdale Reservoir stood at its lowest level in recorded history, and the agricultural community around it had begun to wither. From the hill overlooking the valley, the contrast was stark. Struggling family farms alongside vast green corporate operations. 6 neighboring properties had already been sold to Heartland Agricultural Investments, a corporate farming enterprise systematically buying up distressed properties. Their industrial irrigation systems, drawing from private deep wells that individual farmers couldn't afford, created islands of green amid the increasingly brown landscape. Ethan drove his pickup past the Wilson place, now sporting a sold sign with the Heartland Agriculture logo. Melissa Chambers, the regional acquisition manager, had visited their kitchen twice in the past month, each offer more insistent than the last. "Mr. Mitchell, you need to recognize the inevitable," she had said during her last visit, speaking with practiced sympathy as she spread documents across their table. "This drought isn't temporary, it's the new reality. Small operations like yours simply can't compete. Heartland's offer is more than generous considering the circumstances." Robert had responded firmly. "This land has been in my family for 4 generations. We don't measure its value by the acre." Melissa had looked at them with what seemed like genuine regret. "Your family has a remarkable legacy here. But legacies need to adapt to survive. Sometimes honoring your ancestors means knowing when to make difficult decisions." The latest offer lay unopened in Robert's desk, 20% higher than the previous one, with a legacy maintenance provision that would allow him to remain in an advisory capacity for 2 years. The deadline, 30 days away, the same as the bank's final extension. By midday, dark clouds had begun gathering on the western horizon. The Weather Service had been predicting a major storm system for days, and the farmers of Riverdale County were divided between hoping for drought relieving rain and fearing crop-damaging hail. "Storms coming in faster than they said," Robert observed as they worked to secure loose equipment. "Better finish the Northfield irrigation repair before it hits." Ethan nodded, grabbing his tools. The ancient irrigation system had developed yet another leak, and every drop of water was precious. As he worked, he found himself wondering how many more repairs he would make to this land before it was no longer theirs to tend. The first heavy drops began to fall as Ethan tightened the final connection. By the time he reached his truck, the sky had opened up completely, rain pounding against the metal roof as lightning split the darkened sky. Little did Ethan know that this storm would bring more than just water to their parched fields. As he drove slowly back toward the main road, headlights on full against the gloom, his life was about to intersect with the very powers that threatened his family's legacy, in a way that neither he nor his father could have possibly imagined. The rain fell in sheets as Ethan's truck crawled along the county road, windshield wipers struggling against the downpour. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the flooded fields on either side. The storm had intensified beyond what anyone had predicted, with local radio warning of flash flooding in low-lying areas. Ethan squinted through the blurred windshield, grateful that he knew these roads well enough to navigate them in near-zero visibility. He was about 3 miles from home when his headlights caught something unusual on the roadside ahead. The distinctive silhouette of a luxury sedan pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly through the deluge. "Who drives a car like that out here?" Ethan muttered to himself, automatically slowing down. In Riverdale County, it was an unwritten rule that you always stop to help a stranded motorist. The rural roads were too isolated, cell service too spotty, and weather too unpredictable to leave someone stranded. As he pulled alongside the vehicle, a sleek black luxury car that looked absurdly out of place on the muddy rural road, Ethan could make out a figure hunched over the open hood, holding a small phone flashlight that did little against the growing darkness. Even through the rain, Ethan could tell the man was wearing an expensive suit, now thoroughly soaked. Ethan parked his truck and grabbed his rain jacket and toolbox from behind the seat. "Need some help?" he called, jogging through the downpour, toward the stranded motorist. The man turned, relief visible on his face despite the rain streaming down it. He appeared to be in his 50s, with silver-flecked dark hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. "Thank God," the man replied, gesturing helplessly at the engine. "It just died while I was driving. I've been trying to reach roadside assistance, but there's no cell service out here." Ethan nodded, already leaning under the hood. "That's Riverdale County for you." Great for growing crops, terrible for phone calls. He aimed his flashlight at the engine. Mind if I take a look? Please, the stranger said, stepping back. I'm afraid cars aren't my area of expertise. Ethan's trained eyes quickly assessed. The sophisticated engine. This is a beautiful machine, he commented, genuinely impressed by the engineering. Don't see many like this around here. I'm not usually driving these rural roads, the man admitted. My GPS rerouted me because of the storm. Then this happened. Ethan methodically checked the most likely culprits for a sudden breakdown. Within minutes, his suspicions were confirmed. Your alternator belt has snapped, he explained, pointing to the damage, and it looks like it took out a few electrical connections when it went. That's why you lost power so suddenly. Can it be fixed? The stranger asked, looking doubtful. Not here, not tonight, Ethan replied honestly. You'll need a tow and a garage with the right parts. He checked his watch. But Morris's garage in town will be closed by now, and the towing service doesn't run after dark in weather like this. The stranger frowned, glancing at the luxury car now being pummeled by rain. I have an important meeting in Westland tomorrow morning. Is there a hotel nearby? Ethan almost laughed before catching himself. Nearest hotel is in Westland, about 40 miles from here. He hesitated before adding, Look, I live just a few miles down this road. You're welcome to stay the night at our place. In the morning, I can tow your car to Morris's and get it fixed. The man seemed surprised by the offer. That's incredibly kind, but I couldn't impose like that. It's no imposition, Ethan assured him. It's what neighbors do around here, even for those just passing through. He extended his hand. I'm Ethan Mitchell. William Harrington, the man replied, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. And I'm very grateful for your help. They transferred William's overnight bag to Ethan's truck, and Ethan placed a few orange reflector triangles around the sedan to mark it clearly for the night. As they drove through the storm toward the Mitchell farm, William seemed genuinely interested in the area. So you're a mechanic? He asked, noting the tools in the truck. Part-time, Ethan explained. I work at Morris's garage 3 days a week. The rest of the time, I help my dad run our farm. A farmer and a mechanic, William observed. That's an impressive combination of skills. Ethan shrugged. Around here, most farmers have to be mechanics too. Can't always afford to call someone. When equipment breaks down, and in farming, timing is everything. A broken tractor during harvest can mean the difference between profit and loss. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the Mitchell farmhouse, Ethan felt a twinge of self-consciousness about bringing such an obviously wealthy stranger to their modest home. The white two-story farmhouse had needed a new coat of paint for years, and the barn's roof showed patches where Ethan had made repairs with mismatched materials. Home sweet home, Ethan said as they pulled up to the house. It's not fancy, but it's solid. Been in our family for 4 generations. It has character, William said, with what seemed like genuine appreciation. You don't see craftsmanship like this in new construction. Robert Mitchell appeared on the porch as they dashed through the rain, his expression curious at the sight of the well-dressed stranger accompanying his son. Dad, this is William Harrington, Ethan explained once they were inside. His car broke. Down on County Road 8, alternator belt snapped and took out some electrics. He needs a place to stay tonight. Robert immediately shifted into host mode, his inherent hospitality overriding any curiosity about their unexpected guest. You're welcome here, Mr. Harrington. Let me get you a towel. You must be soaked through. Please, call me William, the stranger insisted, taking in the farmhouse's interior with interest. His eyes lingered on the family photographs that chronicled the Mitchell family's history. As Robert went to fetch dry towels, William commented on a particular photo showing a much younger Robert standing proudly beside an older man next to a tractor. Your father? He asked when Ethan rejoined him. My grandfather, Ethan confirmed. That was taken the year before he passed. He's the one who expanded the farm during the 80s when land prices dropped. Everyone thought he was crazy to buy more acreage during the farm crisis, but he believed in the long-term value of good soil. A man with vision, William remarked. Those are rare. Robert returned with towels and showed William to the guest room, a simple but clean space that had once belonged to Ethan's older sister before she moved to Chicago. While their guest changed into dry clothes, Ethan and his father spoke quietly in the kitchen. Expensive suit, luxury car. What's someone like him doing on County Road 8 during a storm? Robert wondered. Said his GPS rerouted him, Ethan explained. He's heading to Westland for a meeting tomorrow? Robert's expression shifted slightly. Westland? What kind of business? Didn't say, Ethan replied, putting on a pot of coffee. But I offered to tow his car to Morris's tomorrow and fix it. Figure I can use the extra work. When William rejoined, them, now dressed in casual clothes that still managed to look expensive, Robert had prepared a simple but hearty dinner from the farm's own produce. As they ate, the conversation remained general. The unusual severity of the storm, the challenges of rural driving, William's impression of the region. So what takes you to Westland? Robert finally asked, his tone casual, but Ethan detected an undercurrent of tension. William set down his fork. I have business at the regional bank headquarters. You're in banking? Robert's voice remained even, but Ethan noticed his father's hand tightening slightly around his water glass. Yes, William confirmed. I've recently taken a position with Regional Capital Partners. I'm reviewing their rural portfolio acquisitions. He seemed to notice the subtle change in atmosphere. You're familiar with Regional? You could say that, Robert replied carefully. They acquired Westland Financial last year. Our mortgage is with them. William nodded thoughtfully. Ah, I see. Regional has acquired several small banks in rural areas recently. It's been a significant adjustment for many communities. The understatement hung in the air for a moment. Ethan wondered if their guest realized that significant adjustment meant foreclosure notices on farms like theirs, families losing land they'd worked for generations, and communities slowly dying as agricultural consolidation eliminated both farms and the businesses that supported them. It certainly has been an adjustment, Robert agreed diplomatically. The conversation shifted to safer topics, but as the evening progressed, Ethan couldn't help noticing William's genuine interest in their farm's operation. After dinner, when Robert brought out the farm's financial records to review, a nightly ritual since the foreclosure notice, William politely excused himself to turn in early, citing his morning meeting. Once their guest was upstairs, Ethan joined his father at the kitchen table. What are the chances, he whispered, a banker from Regional Capital staying under our roof? Fate has a strange sense of humor, Robert replied, looking down at the foreclosure notice still sitting on the table. But it doesn't change anything. 30 days is 30 days, no matter how nice he seems. As Ethan lay in bed that night, listening to the storm gradually subside, he found himself wondering about their guest. William Harrington seemed nothing like the cold, corporate image he'd formed of Regional Capital's executives. The man had shown genuine respect for their home, their history, and their work, a far cry from Melissa Chambers' condescending sympathy. But then again, Ethan reflected, appearances could be deceiving. Tomorrow, William would return to his world of boardrooms and balance sheets where farms like theirs were just assets on a ledger, their value measured solely in potential profit. And the Mitchells would return to their increasingly desperate attempt to save a legacy that the financial world had already written off. Little did Ethan know that the car he had offered to repair would lead to revelations that would challenge everything both he and William thought they understood about value, legacy, and the true cost of progress. Dawn broke clear and brilliant after the storm. the morning sun illuminating puddles across the farmyard where Ethan was already at work. He had risen earlier than usual, determined to get his regular chores done before tackling the repair on William's car. The rhythm of farm life didn't pause for unexpected guests or broken-down luxury sedans. Ethan was checking the irrigation lines for storm damage when William emerged from the house, looking surprisingly comfortable in his casual clothes despite being clearly out of his element on a working farm. "Good morning," William called, walking over to where Ethan worked. "Your father said I'd find you out here. He mentioned you've been up since before sunrise." Ethan straightened, wiping his hands. "On a rag. Farm schedule doesn't change much. Storm or no storm, Dad's making breakfast if you're hungry." "I've eaten, thank you," William replied, glancing around at the farm with fresh eyes in the morning light. "He's an excellent host. I offered to pay for the night's lodging, but he wouldn't hear of it." "That's Dad," Ethan said with a slight smile. "Old school when it comes to hospitality." William nodded, then gestured toward the field stretching beyond the farmyard. "He was explaining your irrigation challenges. I had no idea the reservoir levels had dropped so dramatically." 3 years of drought will do that," Ethan replied, surprised by the banker's interest. "The corporate farms drill deep wells that tap the aquifer directly, but individual farmers like us can't afford that kind of investment." "Creating an uneven playing field," William observed thoughtfully. "That's one way to put it," Ethan agreed. "We call it slowly drowning while watching others drink their fill." The words came out more bitterly than he'd intended, and he quickly changed the subject. "I'll head out to get your car soon. Morris's opens at 8, and I can pick up the parts I need there." "There's no rush," William assured him. "My meeting isn't until 11. Perhaps I could see more of your operation first. Your father mentioned you've implemented some innovative water conservation techniques." Ethan couldn't hide his surprise at the banker's interest. "Sure, if you really want to. Not many people from your world find farming techniques interesting." "My world?" William raised an eyebrow. "Banking," Ethan clarified. "Finance." William's expression shifted slightly. "Ah, well, perhaps I'm the exception that proves the rule. I find it's important to understand the realities behind the numbers on spreadsheets." For the next hour, Ethan gave William a tour of the Mitchell farm, explaining the water-saving irrigation methods he'd designed, the crop rotation system that maximized soil health, and the equipment modifications he'd engineered to extend the life of their aging machinery. To his surprise, William asked thoughtful, informed questions that revealed a deeper understanding of agriculture than Ethan had expected. "This drip irrigation system is remarkable," William commented as they examined one of Ethan's custom-designed water delivery systems. "You developed this yourself?" "Had to," Ethan explained. "The commercial systems are designed for larger operations with different soil conditions. Our fields have varied soil composition, sandy in some sections, more clay in others. This allows us to regulate water delivery based on each section's needs." William knelt to examine the system more closely. "That's genuine innovation born of necessity. Have you considered patenting any of these designs?" Ethan laughed. "Patents cost money. Besides, a lot of local farmers have adopted my designs. Seems wrong to charge neighbors for ideas that might help them survive." William gave him a curious look. "That's a generous perspective." By the time they returned to the farmhouse, Ethan had developed a grudging respect for the banker's genuine interest in their operation. They loaded Ethan's truck with the necessary towing equipment, and Robert insisted on packing a thermos of coffee for their drive. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Mr. Mitchell," William said as they prepared to leave. "It's been truly enlightening." "Just Robert, please," Ethan's father replied, his expression warmer than it had been the previous evening. "And you're welcome back any time, meeting or no meeting." As they drove toward the stranded car, Ethan found himself curious about his passenger. So, these rural portfolio acquisitions you're reviewing, that includes farm foreclosures, doesn't it? William didn't immediately answer, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape, where the storm's impact was evident in flattened crops and standing water in the fields. Yes, he finally said, among other things. Must be an interesting job, Ethan commented, keeping his tone neutral. Deciding which farms live and which ones die. That's not how I would characterize it, William replied, a note of discomfort in his voice. No? What would you call it then? William seemed to choose his words carefully. I would call it evaluating assets based on their potential for sustainable productivity within market constraints. We call it watching generations of work being erased by people who've never had dirt under their fingernails, Ethan countered, then immediately regretted his bluntness. Sorry, that was out of line. No, William said quietly. It wasn't. It's a fair perspective, and one I'm trying to better understand. He paused before adding, for what it's worth, I'm relatively new to this position. I've spent most of my career in urban commercial lending. The agricultural sector presents different challenges. They reached the stranded sedan, still sitting where they'd left it the night before. The morning sun highlighted its elegant lines, now splashed with mud from the storm. Ethan efficiently attached the towing equipment and secured the car to his truck. How'd someone from urban commercial lending end up reviewing farm loans in Riverdale County? Ethan asked as they drove toward town. A recent promotion, William explained. Regional Capital is restructuring its approach to rural lending, and they wanted someone with fresh perspective to evaluate the portfolio. Fresh perspective, meaning someone who won't be swayed by knowing the families whose farms are on the line, Ethan asked, unable to keep the edge from his voice. William turned to look at him directly. Perhaps, but I prefer to think they wanted someone who might see opportunities others have missed. The remainder of the drive passed in thoughtful silence. Morris's garage was just opening as they arrived, the owner, Jim Morris, raising an eyebrow at the luxury car being towed by Ethan's battered truck. Now there's something you don't see every day, Jim commented. Friend of yours, Ethan? Stranded motorist, Ethan explained. Alternator belt snapped during the storm last night. Took out some electrical connections too. Jim whistled as he examined the car. Fancy machine, parts won't be cheap. I'm prepared for that, William assured him, pulling out a sleek credit card. While Jim processed the payment for the parts, Ethan began work on the car, his skilled hands moving confidently through the complicated engine compartment. William watched with evident interest and respect. You're very good at this, he observed. How long have you been a mechanic? Officially about 5 years, Ethan replied, not looking up from his work. Unofficially, since I was 12, and my dad's tractor broke down during harvest. Couldn't afford to wait for a repair service, so I figured it out. Self-taught? Mostly. Took some vocational courses in high school, then learned the rest through experience. Ethan paused his work to look at William. Truth is, I probably love the mechanical work more than farming itself. But the farm is family. It's legacy. William nodded thoughtfully. Legacy is a powerful motivator. Speaking of which, Ethan said, returning to his work, you're with Regional Capital now, but the sign on your car says Harrington Financial. Old employer? William hesitated, and something in his pause made Ethan look up. The banker's expression had shifted, becoming more guarded. Not exactly, William admitted. Harrington Financial was my family's bank for 3 generations. Regional Capital acquired it last year. Ethan's hands stilled on the engine. Your family owned a bank, and Regional bought it? Yes, William confirmed. It was a difficult decision, but market pressures made it increasingly challenging for independent banks to compete with larger institutions. Ethan absorbed this information, seeing William in a new light. So you went from being the owner to being an employee? Executive Vice President of Rural Development, William clarified. I retained some influence in how the transition would be handled, particularly regarding our long-standing customers. Ethan returned to his repair work, processing this revelation. Seems like we have something in common then, both watching. Family legacies get swallowed by bigger operations. I hadn't thought of it that way, William admitted, but there are parallels. As Ethan continued working, Jim approached with a stack of papers. Got the parts ordered, Mr. Harrington, just need your signature on these forms. He handed William the paperwork and a pen. William reviewed the documents, signing where indicated. As he finished, Jim collected the forms and paused, looking at the signature. Harrington, William Harrington. His eyes widened slightly. Any relation to Harrington Financial? Yes, William acknowledged. It was my family's bank. Jim's expression changed immediately. Which regional capital partners now owns? His tone had cooled noticeably. Same outfit that's foreclosing on half the farms in the county. Ethan glanced up, sensing the sudden tension. William's face remained composed, but Ethan could see discomfort in his eyes. I understand there have been challenges with the transition, William began, but Jim cut him off. Challenges? Is that what you call it when families lose farms they've worked for generations? Jim shook his head. You know, my brother-in-law had a loan with your bank for 15 years. Never missed a payment. Then Regional takes over, recategorizes his risk assessment, and suddenly he's 90 days from losing everything. William frowned. That shouldn't have happened under the acquisition terms. If you'd provide his name, save it, Jim interrupted. The damage is done. He looked at Ethan. You need anything else for the repair, just let me know. With that, he walked back to his office, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. Ethan returned his focus to the repair, working methodically while William stood nearby, his earlier enthusiasm noticeably dampened. After several minutes of silence, William spoke quietly. Is that how everyone in the community sees regional capital? And by extension me? Ethan considered his answer carefully. Pretty much. When a local bank gets bought out by a corporation, who based hundreds of miles away, the human element gets lost. Suddenly, farms aren't homes and livelihoods, they're just assets on a balance sheet. William ran a hand through his silver-flecked hair. That was never the intention. The acquisition terms specifically included provisions for maintaining relationships with long-term customers. Maybe on paper, Ethan replied, tightening a connection, but intentions don't mean much when the people implementing them see only numbers, not faces. As he finished the repair, Ethan found himself in the unusual position of feeling sympathy for the banker. William clearly hadn't anticipated the community's perspective, and his discomfort seemed genuine. That should do it, Ethan announced, closing the hood. Want to start it up and see? William slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine purred to life immediately, running even more smoothly than before. Impressive work, William said, genuine appreciation in his voice. He reached for his wallet. What do I owe you for the labor? Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, considering. Tell you what, instead of paying me, how about you do something for me? William looked intrigued. What did you have in mind? Before you head to your meeting, take a drive with me. There's something I want to show you. William hesitated only briefly before nodding. I have time before my meeting. Where are we going? You'll see, Ethan replied, grabbing his keys. We'll take your car. It's about time someone drove it who actually appreciates the engineering. A hint of a smile touched William's face as he handed the keys to Ethan. I suspect you'll get more enjoyment from driving it than I do. Ethan couldn't deny the thrill of sliding behind the wheel of the luxury sedan. The leather seat adjusted automatically to his frame, and the dashboard displayed an array of sophisticated controls. "This is a long way from my pickup," he admitted as they pulled away from Morris's garage. Instead of turning toward the main highway that would lead to Westland, Ethan drove deeper into Riverdale County, following rural roads that wound through the patchwork of farms making up the community. The contrast between properties was stark, some still maintaining a degree of productivity despite the drought, others clearly abandoned or absorbed into larger operations. "First stop," Ethan announced, pulling up beside a rusted gate hanging askew from a single hinge. Beyond it, a dilapidated farmhouse stood with broken windows and a partially collapsed roof. The fields surrounding it lay fallow, overtaken by weeds. "The Davidson place," Ethan explained. 3 generations of family farming ended 2 years ago when their loan was called in after Westland Financial's acquisition. Mark Davidson had already lost his wife to cancer the year before, couldn't handle losing the farm too. Ethan's voice grew quieter. He took his own life 3 months after the foreclosure. His kids had to move in with relatives in Kansas City. William's expression tightened as he studied the abandoned property. "I wasn't aware of these details." "No, you wouldn't be," Ethan agreed without accusation. "That information doesn't show up on the balance sheets." They drove on, stopping at several more properties with similar stories. The Wilson Farm, now displaying the Heartland Agricultural Investment sign. The Ramirez Orchard, its fruit trees cut down to make way for commodity crops. The Henderson Dairy, its barns empty after 4 generations of operation. As they drove, Ethan shared not just the financial outcomes of each foreclosure, but the human cost behind them. Children changing schools mid-year, elderly farmers forced into retirement communities far from the land they'd worked all their lives, community organizations losing vital volunteer leaders and financial support. William listened, in silence, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When they passed the shuttered storefront of what had once been Riverdale's hardware store, he finally spoke. "The ripple effects extend beyond the farms themselves," he observed. "That's what people from outside don't understand," Ethan confirmed. "When farms fail, everything connected to them fails too. The hardware store, the diner, the school, every foreclosure takes a piece of the community with it." Their next stop was a small cemetery on a gentle hillside overlooking the valley. Ethan parked and led William through rows of headstones bearing familiar names, the same names they had seen on the abandoned farms. "My grandfather is buried here," Ethan said, stopping beside a simple marker. "Next to him are 4 generations of Mitchells going back to the 1870s. When my great-great-grandfather first plowed our land, he didn't just start a farm. He planted roots for an entire family tree." William studied the grave markers, noting the dates and connections. "Your family has been here for a long time. And if Westland Financial, now regional capital, has its way, we'll be the last Mitchells to farm that land," Ethan said quietly. "Just another entry in the foreclosure column." William's expression had grown increasingly somber throughout. "There too. I appreciate you showing me this, Ethan, but I'm not sure what you expect me to do with this information. The financial realities—" "That's our last stop," Ethan interrupted, heading back to the car. "The financial realities." They drove to the far side of the county, where vast uniform fields stretched to the horizon. Modern equipment moved efficiently through perfectly straight rows of crops, and automated irrigation systems created artificial rainfall in precise patterns. No farmhouses dotted this landscape, just an occasional metal building housing equipment or supplies. "Heartland Agricultural Investments," Ethan said as they parked on a rise overlooking the operation. 15 former family farms consolidated into one corporate entity, efficient, profitable, and completely devoid of human connection. William observed the industrial-scale farming with a professional eye. "The productivity is impressive," he noted. "Oh, it's productive," Ethan agreed, "but at what cost? The soil gets maximum yield for a few years. then requires increasing chemical inputs to maintain production. Water is pumped from deep wells at unsustainable rates. And the profits? They don't cycle back through local businesses or support community institutions. They go to shareholders who've never set foot in Riverdale County. William turned to look at Ethan directly. You've made your point eloquently, Ethan. But what exactly do you want from me? I can't single-handedly change regional capital's lending policies. Can't you? Ethan challenged. You said you're the executive vice president of rural development. You retained influence as part of the acquisition. If anyone can make a difference, it's you. William sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. There are board approvals, risk assessments, regulatory requirements. There are people, Ethan interrupted firmly. Families, communities, the same kind of people who banked with Harrington Financial for generations, because they trusted the Harrington family to see them as more than numbers on a ledger. The words hung in the air between them, and Ethan could see they had hit their mark. William's expression shifted from defensive to reflective as he gazed out over the corporate farmland. You're right, he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what made Harrington Financial different from the corporate banks. We weren't just lenders, we were partners in community development. It's not too late to bring that philosophy to regional capital, Ethan suggested, at least for the farms that haven't been foreclosed on yet, including ours. William checked his watch. I need to head to my meeting, but I'd like to continue this conversation. What you've shown me today, it matters. It should matter in our decision-making process. As they drove back toward town, William seemed deep in thought. When they reached Morris's garage, he turned to Ethan with newfound resolution in his eyes. My meeting today is with Regional Capital's board to present my assessment of the rural loan portfolio, he explained, including your father's loan. I'll be honest, before today, my recommendation would have been to proceed with scheduled foreclosures on properties that don't meet our current productivity metrics. Ethan felt his heart sink, despite having expected as much. And now? Now, I need to reconsider some assumptions, William replied. The metrics we've been using don't capture everything you've shown me today. They don't account for innovation like your irrigation system or community impact or the value of generational knowledge. So you'll recommend extending our loan? Ethan asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. William's answer was measured. I can't make promises about specific cases, but I can commit to advocating for a more comprehensive evaluation process that considers factors beyond the standard financial indicators. He extended his hand. Thank you for your honesty today, Ethan, and for the excellent repair work. As they shook hands, Ethan felt a cautious optimism. Thank you for listening. One more thing, William added. Would your father be willing to meet with me again? Perhaps tomorrow? I'd like to discuss some ideas about your farm's situation specifically. I'm sure he would, Ethan replied, surprised and intrigued. After William departed for his meeting, in Westland, Ethan returned to the farm, his mind racing with possibilities. Had he actually made an impression on a regional capital executive? Could William Harrington really influence the bank's approach to farms like theirs? Or was this just a polite gesture before business as usual resumed? Robert was repairing fence damage from the storm when Ethan pulled up. Car fixed, he called as his son approached. Fixed and gone, Ethan confirmed. But there's more to the story. Inside the kitchen, Ethan recounted the morning's revelations. William's identity as the former owner of Harrington Financial, the tour of foreclosed farms, and his request to meet with Robert again. Robert listened with growing amazement. So our overnight guest isn't just any banker, he's the Harrington of Harrington Financial, the bank that served this county for over 70 years before Regional Capital bought them out. The very same, Ethan confirmed. "And I hope, that seeing the real impact of these foreclosures might have changed his perspective." Robert looked skeptical. "That's a nice thought, son, but corporate policies aren't changed by one field trip." "Maybe not," Ethan conceded, "but William seemed genuinely affected. He said he wants to talk with you about our specific situation." "To what end?" Robert wondered. "The numbers don't lie. We're behind on our payments, and our productivity has been hit hard by the drought. No amount of goodwill changes those facts." "Maybe not," Ethan repeated. "But for the first time since that foreclosure notice arrived, I feel like someone might actually be looking at more than just the numbers." The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm of farm work, but an undercurrent of anticipation ran through the Mitchell household. By evening, neither had heard anything from William Harrington, and Robert's skepticism began to resurface. "Board meetings can run long," Ethan offered as they sat down to dinner, "and he said he'd contact us about meeting tomorrow." Robert nodded, though his expression remained doubtful. The Mitchell household was awake earlier than usual the following morning. Though neither father nor son discussed it openly, the possibility of William Harrington's return hung in the air, creating an atmosphere of nervous anticipation. Ethan found himself checking his phone for messages more frequently than normal, and Robert seemed distracted as they worked through their morning chores. By mid-morning, with no word from William, Robert's expression had settled into resigned disappointment. "Don't take it too hard, son," he said as they repaired storm damage to one of the outbuildings. "Bankers have been making empty promises to farmers since the beginning of time." Ethan wanted to disagree, but found his own optimism fading as the hours passed. Perhaps he had misread William's interest, or overestimated the impact of their tour. After all, corporate executives didn't change long-established policies based on one emotional appeal. Shortly after noon, as they were breaking for lunch, the distinctive sound of tires on gravel drew their attention. A black luxury sedan was making its way up the long driveway, moving carefully around the worst of the mud puddles left by the storm. "Well, I'll be damned," Robert murmured, setting down his sandwich. "He actually came back." William Harrington wasn't alone. As the car parked and its occupants emerged, Ethan recognized Melissa Chambers, the Heartland Agricultural Acquisitions Manager, and another man in a business suit whom he didn't know. "Not sure I like this," Robert muttered. "Bringing reinforcements doesn't usually signal good news," Ethan silently agreed, his hope giving way to apprehension. Had William simply brought witnesses for a final rejection? Was Melissa here to present yet another purchase offer as an alternative to foreclosure? "Mr. Mitchell, Ethan," William greeted them, his manner professional, but with a warmth that Ethan hadn't expected. "Thank you for allowing us to visit again. I apologize for not calling ahead, but we wanted to speak with you as soon as possible." After our board meeting concluded, Robert nodded cautiously. "We appreciate you making the trip back out here. Allow me to introduce my colleagues," William continued. "You know Melissa Chambers from Heartland Agricultural Investments, and this is James Peterson, Senior Loan Officer for Regional Capital's Agricultural Division." Formal handshakes were exchanged as Robert invited the group into the house. In the kitchen, which had never hosted so many suits at once, there was an awkward moment as everyone found places around the table where the half-eaten sandwiches still sat. "I apologize for interrupting your lunch," William said. "Farm work continues regardless of visitors," Robert replied evenly. "What can we do for you folks?" William looked to his colleagues before answering. "Actually, it's more about what we might be able to do together. Yesterday's conversations with Ethan and seeing your operation firsthand prompted some serious discussions at our meeting." James Peterson, the loan officer, opened a leather portfolio. "We've been reviewing your loan situation, Mr. Mitchell. As you know, under current terms, foreclosure proceedings would begin in 27 days. Robert's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "I'm aware of our timeline. What you may not be aware of, William interjected, is that Regional Capital has authorized a new initiative called the Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program. It's designed specifically for multi-generational family farms with demonstrated innovation in sustainable practices. Ethan and his father exchanged confused glances. "I've never heard of this program," Robert said carefully. "That's because it didn't exist until last night," William admitted with a small smile. "The board approved it based on our recommendations following yesterday's meeting." Melissa Chambers spoke up. "What William is too modest to say is that he spent 3 hours convincing the board to rethink our entire approach to agricultural lending in communities like Riverdale County." A spark of hope flickered in Ethan's chest, but years of disappointment had taught him caution. "What exactly does this program offer?" James slid a document across the table. "For qualifying farms, which yours would be, it offers loan restructuring with significantly reduced interest rates, extended payment timelines, and most importantly, a 2-year forbearance period during which no payments would be required." Robert stared at the document in disbelief. "That's unusually generous for a commercial bank." "It's not charity," William clarified. "It's strategic investment in sustainable agriculture. The forbearance period gives you time to implement your water, conservation systems more broadly, and restore productivity. After that, graduated payments would begin based on actual farm income, not projected yields." Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "What's the catch?" William nodded to Melissa, who pulled out her own set of documents. "This is where Heartland Agricultural Investments comes in. Instead of purchasing distressed farms outright, we're shifting to a collaborative model for select properties. We're proposing a partnership arrangement. You maintain ownership and operational control of your land, while Heartland provides capital investment for infrastructure improvements." "In exchange for what?" Robert asked, his farmer's skepticism showing through. "In exchange for a minority equity share in specific innovations," Melissa explained, "particularly Ethan's water conservation technology, which has significant potential for broader application." Ethan sat up straighter. "My irrigation system," William nodded. "Your designs impressed me yesterday. They're precisely the kind of innovation that could help many farms adapt to changing climate conditions. Heartland would provide the capital to refine, patent, and potentially market these systems to other agricultural operations, while you maintain control of your farm and receive ongoing royalties from the technology deployment," Melissa added. "It's a partnership model rather than an acquisition." Robert looked overwhelmed. "This is a lot to take in. Yesterday you were foreclosing, and today you're offering investment." "Yesterday we were operating on incomplete information," William replied candidly. "We were evaluating your farm solely on its current productivity and loan compliance, without considering its innovation potential or community significance." The loan officer spoke up again. "Purely from a banking perspective, Mr. Mitchell, this approach actually makes better financial sense in the long term. Foreclosure and resale of agricultural properties in current market conditions typically recovers only 70% of loan value. Restructuring under this program projects 90+% recovery over time, while maintaining community stability, which benefits our broader lending portfolio in the region." Ethan's mind was racing with possibilities. "So the farm stays in our family. We get breathing room on the loan and capital investment for infrastructure improvements, all in exchange for sharing the irrigation technology I was already allowing neighboring farmers to copy for free." William nodded. "That's the essence of it, yes. Though I should clarify that Heartland wouldn't restrict local farmers from implementing your current designs. Their interest is in the commercial applications for larger operations beyond Riverdale County." "Why the change of heart?" Robert asked, looking directly at William. "Banks don't typically create new lending programs overnight." William seemed to consider his answer carefully. Do you know why my family founded Harrington Financial? In 1947, Mr. Mitchell, Robert shook his head. Because the existing banks wouldn't lend to returning soldiers who wanted to start farms but had no collateral, William explained. My grandfather believed banking should serve community development, not just profit margins. When Regional Capital acquired Harrington Financial, I convinced myself that the efficiency of a larger institution would better serve our customers. He paused, his expression regretful. I was wrong. What Ethan showed me yesterday reminded me that financial decisions have human consequences that don't appear on balance sheets. So you single-handedly convinced a corporate board to change its entire approach to agricultural lending? Ethan asked, still skeptical. Not single-handedly, William corrected, glancing at his colleagues. And not the entire approach, just a targeted program for specific high-potential farms. The truth is, Regional Capital has been searching for ways to address their struggling agricultural portfolio. This program offers a potential model that serves both the bank's financial interests and the community's stability. Robert studied the documents before him, a lifetime of caution warring with desperate hope. We'd need our lawyer to review these before signing anything. Of course, William agreed immediately. Take whatever time you need. The foreclosure proceedings have already been suspended pending your decision. And if we decline, Robert asked, then the original timeline would resume, William answered honestly. I won't pretend this erases the underlying financial challenges, but I believe this approach offers a better outcome for everyone involved. As the conversation continued into the specific terms of the proposed arrangement, Ethan found himself watching William Harrington with newfound respect. The banker had actually listened, considered, and acted on what he'd learned, something Ethan had all but given up expecting from anyone in a position of financial power. Later, as the visitors prepared to leave, William pulled Ethan aside. I want you to know that your perspective yesterday genuinely changed how I view my role at Regional Capital. Sometimes we get so focused on financial metrics that we forget the human stories behind them. I never expected anything to come of it, Ethan admitted. I just wanted you to see what these decisions really mean for communities like ours. Well, it made a difference, William assured him. The Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program has applications beyond your farm. We're identifying other properties that might qualify, including your neighbor Henderson's dairy operation. The implications of that statement hit Ethan full force. You mean other farms might be saved too? If they meet the criteria, yes, William confirmed. Innovative practices, multi-generational operations, community significance, the same factors that make your farm worth preserving. As they watched the black sedan disappear down the driveway, Robert turned to his son with a mixture of disbelief and cautious optimism. What exactly did you say to that man yesterday? I just showed him the reality behind the numbers, Ethan replied. The farms, the families, the community that gets lost when everything is reduced to profit margins. Robert shook his head in amazement. In all my years of farming, I've never seen a banker change course like that. Maybe he just needed to be reminded of why his family started a bank in the first place, Ethan suggested. Sometimes people just need to reconnect with their own values. That evening, as they reviewed the proposal documents with careful attention, the future of the Mitchell farm seemed to shift from imminent loss to possible renewal. The terms weren't perfect, and many challenges remained. But for the first time, in years, there was a path forward that didn't end in foreclosure. You know, Robert said as they finished their review, your mother always said you had a gift for fixing broken things. I always thought she meant tractors and equipment. He looked at his son with newfound appreciation. Turns out you can fix broken systems too. Ethan smiled, thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A storm, a broken-down car, an act of simple kindness that had somehow opened the door to saving not just their farm, but possibly others throughout Riverdale County. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important repairs aren't the ones you can see. 3 months after William Harrington's unexpected visit, Riverdale County was buzzing with activity that had nothing to do with the usual harvest preparations. On the Mitchell farm, a team of engineers was installing an expanded version of Ethan's irrigation system across fields that had lain fallow the previous season. The distinctive Heartland Agricultural Investments logo appeared on their equipment, but unlike before, it didn't signal the end of family farming. It marked a new kind of beginning. Ethan stood beside William Harrington at the edge of the north field, both men watching as workers calibrated sensors that would regulate water flow based on soil moisture readings. The contrast between them remained striking. William in his business casual attire, Ethan in worn work clothes, but the dynamic between them had evolved into something approaching partnership. "The installation is ahead of schedule," William observed. "The engineering team tells me your design adaptations solved several implementation challenges they were anticipating." Ethan nodded, surveying the work with a critical eye. "It's one thing to make something work on one farm with specific conditions. Scaling it for different soil types and topographies is another challenge entirely." "Which is precisely why your ongoing involvement is crucial," William replied. "The technical team can handle manufacturing and installation, but they don't have your practical understanding of how water behaves in real-world conditions." The Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program had moved with surprising speed from proposal to implementation. Once the Mitchells had signed the agreement, after their lawyer had reviewed and negotiated some key points, Heartland had wasted no time deploying resources. The irrigation system installation was just the most visible aspect of changes spreading throughout Riverdale County. "How many farms have enrolled now?" Ethan asked as they walked along the perimeter of the field. 11 confirmed, with 5 more in review, William replied, including the Henderson dairy operation and the Ramirez orchard, which we're helping to restore. The mention of the Ramirez property brought a smile to Ethan's face. The orchard had been one of their stops during William's tour 3 months ago, a once thriving family business that had been partially cleared after foreclosure. Now, under the new program, the Ramirez family was replanting, using an adaptation of Ethan's water conservation system specifically designed for fruit trees. "Carlos Ramirez told me his father cried when they signed the papers to get the land back," Ethan said. 3 generations of work that almost disappeared forever. William nodded soberly. "That's the human element I lost sight of in the financial analysis. Each property represents more than assets and liabilities. They're the physical embodiment of family histories." As they continued their inspection, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from his father. "Meeting Erove Town Hall running long. Starting without us. Join when you can." "Dad's still at the Community Development Committee," Ethan explained. "Apparently it's running overtime again." William checked his watch. "That's the 3rd extended meeting this month. Seems like the whole county is in planning mode. When people see a future again, they start making plans," Ethan observed. "It's been a while since Riverdale County had much to plan for." The ripple effects of the Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program had extended far beyond the participating farms. As word spread that foreclosures had been halted and a new collaborative model was emerging, the psychological cloud hanging over the community had begun to lift. The hardware store downtown had postponed its going out of business sale. The local diner had extended its hours again. Even the high school had seen a slight uptick in enrollment as families who had been planning to leave decided to stay. The regional economic impact analysis came in yesterday, William mentioned as they headed back toward the farmhouse. Early projections suggest the program could generate a 30% increase in agricultural productivity across participating farms within 2 years, with corresponding benefits to supporting businesses. "And the bank's bottom line?" Ethan asked pointedly. William smiled slightly. "Projected return on investment is actually higher than under the previous foreclosure model, though over a longer time horizon. Turns out, sustainable practices can be good business." At the farmhouse, Robert's absence was noticeable, but the kitchen table was covered with evidence of his recent focus: community development plans, water management proposals, and agricultural diversification strategies. Since the new program had been implemented, Robert had emerged as a natural leader in the county's revitalization efforts, bringing together farmers, business owners, and local officials to coordinate their approach. "Your father has become quite the community organizer," William observed, glancing at the papers. "Regional Capital's Community Development Division is very impressed with the comprehensive nature of these proposals." "Dad always had these ideas," Ethan explained, "but it's hard to think about community development when you're worried about losing your farm in 30 days. Once that pressure lifted, all this creativity started flowing." William nodded thoughtfully. "That's a perspective our financial models never captured, the opportunity cost of constant crisis. How many innovations never happened because people were too focused on day-to-day survival?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Melissa Chambers, who had become a regular presence at the Mitchell farm as the partnership developed. Her corporate efficiency remained, but her approach had softened notably since the program began. "The prototype installation looks excellent," she announced without preamble. "Engineering team says Ethan's latest modifications improved efficiency by another 12%. 13, Ethan corrected with a hint of pride. "The soil composition in the eastern section allows for slightly reduced flow rates." Melissa made a note on her tablet. "The patent attorneys want to meet next week to finalize the application materials. They're particularly interested in the adaptive sensor technology you've developed." The pending patents represented a significant shift in Ethan's life trajectory. Under the partnership agreement, he was named as primary inventor on several patent applications, with provisions for royalties from any commercial applications beyond Riverdale County. What had begun as practical solutions to his family's water challenges was evolving into innovations with potential national or even global applications. "There's something else we should discuss," William said, as the three of them settled at the kitchen table. "The board has approved funding for a rural innovation center here in Riverdale County. They'd like it to serve as headquarters for the Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program and a testing ground for emerging sustainable farming technologies." Ethan looked up in surprise. "Here, not in Westland." "The point is to be close to the actual farming operations," Melissa explained. "Real-world testing and immediate feedback from practicing farmers. And," William added, "they'd like you to consider a leadership role in the center's operations, Ethan. Your combination of mechanical innovation and practical farming experience is exactly what the initiative needs." Ethan sat back, momentarily speechless. "Me? Running an innovation center? Co-directing," Melissa clarified. "Working alongside agricultural scientists and engineers, but providing the essential perspective of someone who actually works the land." The offer was unexpected and somewhat overwhelming. 3 months ago, Ethan had been a farmer's son with a knack for mechanical repairs, desperately trying to save his family's land. Now he was being offered a position that would leverage his self-taught skills on a much broader scale. "I'd need to think about it," he said finally. "The farm is still my priority." Of course, William agreed. And the position would be structured to accommodate that commitment. We're not asking you to choose between innovation and farming. Quite the opposite. Your connection to the practical realities of agriculture is precisely what makes your perspective valuable. As they discussed the details, Ethan found himself reflecting on how dramatically circumstances had changed since the stormy night when William's car had broken down on County Road 8. What had seemed like terrible luck, another burden in an already challenging time, had transformed into an opportunity that no one could have anticipated. Later that afternoon, as William and Melissa departed, Robert finally returned from his meeting in town, energy radiating from him despite his obvious fatigue. "You're not going to believe this," he announced as he entered the kitchen. "The town council just unanimously approved the community development plan. Full support for revitalizing the downtown area in coordination with the agricultural initiatives." "That's great, Dad," Ethan replied, helping his father sort through the materials he'd brought home. "There's more," Robert continued. "The County Water Authority voted to revise allocation priorities to support farms implementing conservation technologies, giving preference to operations using systems like yours. This was significant news. Water access had been a contentious issue throughout the drought years, with larger operations typically receiving preferential treatment. A policy shift that recognized and rewarded conservation efforts would benefit smaller farms disproportionately. "Sounds like the meeting was productive," Ethan observed. "It's like a dam broke," Robert said, the metaphor particularly apt in their water-conscious region. "Once people saw that the foreclosures weren't inevitable, that there was actually a path forward, all this pent-up community spirit started flowing again." Ethan shared William's job offer with his father, including his reservations about dividing his attention between the farm and the innovation center. Robert listened thoughtfully before responding. "You know, when I was your age, I saw my future as exclusively tied to this land, working it exactly as my father had, and his father before him." He gestured toward the fields visible through the kitchen window. "But maybe the true Mitchell legacy isn't just about farming this particular soil. Maybe it's about the spirit of innovation and adaptation that's kept us going through 4 generations of challenges." "You think I should take the position?" Ethan asked, surprised by his father's perspective. "I think you should consider how much more impact your ideas could have beyond our fence lines," Robert replied. "Those irrigation systems you designed aren't just saving our farm, they're saving the Ramirez Orchard, the Henderson Dairy, and who knows how many operations in the future." Ethan hadn't thought about it that way. His innovations had always been practical responses to immediate problems, not conscious attempts to create broader solutions. But the ripple effects were undeniable, extending far beyond what he had initially imagined. "Besides," Robert added with a smile, "who better to ensure that the corporate world doesn't completely lose sight of what matters on the ground? Someone needs to keep reminding them that farming isn't just about productivity metrics and profit margins." "That's essentially what William said," Ethan admitted, "that my value would be in providing the perspective of someone who actually works the land." "Smart man," Robert nodded. "He's learned some important lessons these past few months." As the day wound down and they completed their evening chores, Ethan found himself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought William Harrington's car to break down on their particular stretch of County Road during that specific storm. Had the alternator belt failed a few miles earlier or later? Had Ethan not been driving by at that precise moment? Or had he chosen not to stop? How different might everything be now? The Mitchell farm would likely be proceeding toward foreclosure. The Ramirez family would not be replanting their orchard. The Henderson Dairy would still be facing closure, and Riverdale County would continue its slow decline as family farms gave way to corporate agriculture. Instead, a simple roadside repair, had somehow set in motion changes that were transforming an entire community's trajectory. As Ethan looked out over the fields where new irrigation systems now gleamed in the setting sun, he couldn't help but reflect on how the smallest actions sometimes produced the most profound consequences. One act of kindness on a stormy night had created ripples that continued to spread in ways no one could have predicted, much like the water flowing through his conservation system, finding its way to roots that had almost withered, bringing renewal to what had nearly been lost. 1 year later, the sign at the entrance to Riverdale County had been repainted, the faded lettering replaced with fresh colors and a new tagline, "Home of the Agricultural Innovation Corridor." Beneath it, smaller text proclaimed, "Where tradition meets technology." The transformation visible throughout the county went far beyond new signage. Fields that had lain fallow a year earlier now flourished with diverse crops, their health evident even during the continuing drought conditions. The distinctive components of Ethan's irrigation system, now officially patented as the Mitchell Conservation Method, dotted the landscape, their solar-powered sensors gleaming in the afternoon sun. Downtown Riverdale had undergone its own revival. The hardware store not only remained open, but had expanded, adding a section dedicated to sustainable farming equipment. The previously shuttered storefronts now housed new businesses, a farm-to-table cafe, an agricultural technology, consulting firm, and most significantly, the newly constructed Riverdale Rural Innovation Center. Inside the center's main research facility, Ethan Mitchell stood before a group of visiting agricultural officials and farmers from 3 neighboring states. At 24, he still dressed like the farmer he remained at heart, though the tablet he used to control the demonstration display hinted at his expanded role. "The key to the Mitchell system isn't just water conservation," he explained, as the visitors observed a tabletop model demonstrating the technology. "It's about creating an integrated approach that optimizes the relationship between water, soil, composition, and plant needs." The questions that followed were technically complex, but Ethan addressed them with the confidence of someone who understood his subject from both theoretical and practical perspectives. This dual knowledge, academic understanding paired with hands-on experience, had become the hallmark of the Riverdale approach to agricultural innovation. As the tour concluded, a familiar figure entered the demonstration room, William Harrington, now officially the president of Regional Capital's Rural Development Division, a promotion that had come directly from his success with the Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program. "Don't let me interrupt," William said, nodding respectfully to the visiting delegation. "I just wanted to confirm our dinner plans." "Just finishing up," Ethan assured him before turning back to answer a final question. "From a farmer concerned about implementation costs, the initial investment is significant," Ethan acknowledged. "But through the partnerships we've established with Regional Capital and similar institutions, financing options make it accessible even for smaller operations. The water savings typically offset the investment within 3 growing seasons, with substantial returns after that." After the visitors departed, William and Ethan walked together through the Innovation Center, a facility that represented the physical embodiment of their unlikely partnership. The delegation seemed impressed, William observed. "They should be," Ethan replied with justifiable pride. "The data from this year's implementations across 52 farms shows average water reduction of 64%, with crop yields maintained at 93% of traditional methods. In drought conditions, that's revolutionary." William nodded his agreement. "The board certainly thinks so." The program's expansion into 3 additional counties has been approved, with potential for statewide implementation next year. They exited the building, stepping into the late afternoon sunshine. The Innovation Center had been strategically located at the edge of town, where it bridged the commercial district and agricultural lands. From its steps, they could see both the revitalized downtown and the patchwork of thriving farms beyond. "Hard to believe it's been a year since that storm," William remarked as they walked toward his car. No longer the luxury sedan that had broken down, but a more practical hybrid SUV better suited to rural roads. "Sometimes I still can't believe how everything changed from one broken alternator belt," Ethan agreed. "If your car hadn't failed exactly when and where it did, I prefer to think it was less about mechanical failure and more about finding the right person at the right time," William replied. "The ideas behind the program would have meant nothing without someone like you to demonstrate why they mattered." The dinner they were heading to marked a significant milestone, the first anniversary of the Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program, with all 11 original participating farms showing remarkable recoveries. The celebration would bring together farmers, bankers, local officials, and business owners who had once viewed each other with suspicion but now worked collaboratively toward regional revitalization. When they arrived at the Mitchell farm, the transformation was evident here as well. The house had received its long-needed coat of paint, the barn roof had been properly repaired, and new equipment stood ready for the upcoming harvest. But unlike the corporate farms with their sterile industrial aesthetic, the Mitchell property retained its character and history while incorporating innovative elements. The farmyard had been converted into an outdoor gathering space for the evening's celebration, with tables arranged beneath string lights and local musicians setting up near the restored barn. Robert Mitchell, now serving as chair of the county's Agricultural Development Committee, in addition to running the farm, was directing the final preparations with characteristic attention to detail. "Perfect timing," Robert called when he spotted Ethan and William. The Ramirez family just arrived with enough of their orchard's first harvest to feed half the county. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The Ramirez orchard, once partially destroyed after foreclosure and now restored through the program, producing fruit again, represented everything the celebration was about: renewal, patience rewarded, and the triumph of sustainable thinking over short-term expediency. As more guests arrived, a mix of farming families, business owners, and even former skeptics who had been won over by the program's success, the atmosphere grew festive. Children played in the yard, while adults shared stories of the past year's challenges and triumphs. The sense of community, almost lost during the darkest days of foreclosures and departures, had returned stronger than before. Melissa Chambers arrived with several Heartland Agricultural Investments executives, their corporate attire somewhat at odds with the casual farm setting. Yet they integrated smoothly into the gathering, their partnership with local farmers having evolved from attempted acquisition to genuine collaboration. "The board is extremely pleased with the returns on our investment," Melissa informed Ethan and William as they greeted her. "Both financial and reputational. We're already fielding inquiries from other regions facing similar agricultural transitions." "The Mitchell method goes national," Ethan quipped, still somewhat uncomfortable with having his name attached to the technology. "International, actually," Melissa corrected. "We've had delegations from 3 countries requesting demonstrations. Sustainable water management is a global challenge." As dinner was served, a feast of locally produced foods representing the county's agricultural diversity, Robert Mitchell stood to address the gathered community. Though never comfortable with public speaking, his natural authenticity commanded attention. "A year ago, many of us gathered in the town hall for a very different reason," he began. "We were trying to figure out how to support families losing their farms, how to keep our schools open with declining enrollments, how to prevent our community from simply disappearing, as so many rural towns have." Murmurs of agreement rippled. Through the audience, the memory of those desperate days still fresh. Today, we're celebrating not just survival, but renewal, Robert continued. Our farms are producing again. Our downtown has new businesses. Our young people are finding reasons to stay or even return. He gestured toward several recent college graduates who had been recruited to work at the Innovation Center. But the most important thing we're celebrating isn't visible in fields or balance sheets. It's the rediscovery of what makes communities like ours special, our connection to the land and to each other. Robert raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast to the many partnerships that made this possible. To regional capital and heartland investments for seeing value where others saw only risk. To the Innovation Center team for bridging tradition and technology, and to my son Ethan, whose ability to fix far more than broken-down cars started it all. As glasses were raised and applause spread through the gathering, William leaned toward Ethan. Your father's right, you know. None of this would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help a stranded motorist that night. Ethan shook his head modestly. Or if your car hadn't broken down at exactly the right place and time, or if you hadn't been willing to actually see what was happening in the community instead of just reviewing foreclosure numbers. I suppose the lesson is that transformation rarely comes from a single factor, William reflected. It takes unexpected connections, open minds, and the courage to question established practices. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music and conversation flowing beneath the stars, the Mitchell farm stood as a testament to that multifaceted transformation. The fields that had nearly been lost now thrived with innovative technology developed on site. The family that had faced foreclosure now led regional agricultural development. And the community that had been slowly dying now showcased a new model of rural economic revitalization. Later, as the event wound down and guests began to depart, Ethan found a quiet moment to visit the spot where it had all begun, the stretch of County Road 8, where he'd found William's stranded car during the storm. The road had been repaved since then, erasing the physical evidence of that pivotal encounter, but its impact remained written across the surrounding landscape in flourishing farms and renewed purpose. Standing there in the gathering dusk, Ethan reflected on how quickly life could change direction, how a simple decision to stop and help a stranger had altered not just his own trajectory, but that of an entire community. The mechanical problem he'd fixed that night had been straightforward, but it had set in motion repairs of a far more complex and meaningful nature. As Ethan turned to head back to the farm, he noticed a car pulled over on the roadside ahead, hazard lights blinking weakly in the twilight. Without hesitation, he walked toward it, already reaching for the small toolkit he still carried out of habit. "Need some help?" he called to the driver, a young woman looking worriedly at her overheating engine. She turned with visible relief. "Yes, please. I'm not from around here and I have no idea what's wrong." "You're in luck," Ethan replied with a smile, already assessing the likely issues. "Helping stranded motorists is something of a specialty around here." As he set to work on the simple repair, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what unexpected connections this roadside encounter might create, what ripples might spread from this small act of assistance. In Riverdale County, they had learned that the most profound transformations often began with the simplest gestures. Jim Morris from the garage drove up behind them, having noticed the stopped vehicles on his way home from the celebration. "Everything all right here, Ethan?" he called, stopping his truck behind them. "Just a loose hose clamp," Ethan explained. "2-minute fix." Jim nodded, then addressed the stranded driver. "Where you headed, miss?" "The university in Westland," she replied. "I'm starting a research position in the agricultural science department next week." Jim and Ethan exchanged meaningful glances. "Working on anything in particular?" Ethan asked casually, tightening the clamp. "Water conservation technologies for drought-affected regions," she explained. That's why I was coming to see the innovation center tomorrow. I wanted to get familiar with the Mitchell method before starting the position. Ethan paused his work, a slow smile spreading across his face. Well, that's quite a coincidence, Jim chuckled. There are no coincidences in Riverdale County anymore, Ethan. Just connections waiting to be made. As they helped the young researcher get back on the road, now with an invitation to stay at the Mitchell farm instead of driving all the way to Westland, Ethan felt the familiar sense of possibilities unfolding. What had begun with one broken car on a stormy night had created a ripple effect that continued to spread in ever-widening circles, connecting people and ideas in ways no one could have predicted. Back at the farmhouse, where the celebration was, winding down, Robert and William stood on the porch, watching the sunset over fields that had nearly been lost just a year before. When I was reviewing foreclosure documents for this property, William confessed, I saw it as nothing more than coordinates on a map, loan numbers on a spreadsheet. I never imagined... That's the problem with looking at the world only through numbers, Robert replied. You miss the stories behind them, the people, the history, the potential. William nodded thoughtfully. The hardest lesson for institutions to learn is that the most valuable assets often don't appear on balance sheets. As Ethan returned with their unexpected guest, already deep in conversation about irrigation innovations, Robert and William exchanged knowing glances. The cycle was beginning again, a chance encounter, an act of kindness, connections forming that would lead to who knew what new developments. In the deepening twilight, the Mitchell farm stood as both a link to the past and a gateway to the future, a place where tradition and innovation had found harmony, where a community had discovered renewal through cooperation rather than competition, and where a simple roadside repair had ultimately fixed far more than just a broken-down car. The legacy being written across Riverdale County wasn't just about agricultural techniques or economic revitalization. It was about remembering that behind every spreadsheet number was a human story, that true value couldn't be measured solely in quarterly returns, and that sometimes the most powerful transformations began with the simplest question: need some help? 3 years later. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Riverdale County as a caravan of vehicles made its way along County Road 8. At the lead was Ethan Mitchell's truck, no longer the battered pickup from years past, but a newer hybrid model, practical yet reflecting the improved fortunes of the Mitchell farm. Behind him followed a line of cars bearing license plates from across the country, representatives from agricultural programs, rural development initiatives, and financial institutions. Today marked the official dedication of the Harrington Mitchell Center for Agricultural Innovation, a sprawling complex that had grown from the modest beginnings of the original Riverdale Rural Innovation Center. What had started in a renovated storefront had expanded into a nationally recognized research facility, drawing visitors and students from around the world. Ethan, now 27, navigated the familiar roads with ease, occasionally glancing in his rearview mirror at the procession behind him. His life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined on that stormy night when he'd stopped to help a stranded motorist. The irrigation system he'd designed out of necessity had evolved into a comprehensive water management approach, now implemented in drought-affected regions across 3 continents. The patents, held jointly by the Mitchell family and Heartland Agricultural Investments, had generated royalties that ensured the family farm would remain viable for generations to come. But more satisfying than the financial security was the ripple effect throughout the community. As Ethan led the caravan through downtown Riverdale, the visitors could see a thriving rural center where vacant buildings had once dominated. The hardware store had doubled in size. The diner now stayed open 7 days a week. New businesses, an agricultural technology startup, a farm-to-table restaurant, and a rural business incubator occupied spaces that had been empty just 3 years earlier. "We'll stop here briefly," Ethan announced over the radio to the following vehicles as he pulled up in front of a newly installed monument in the town square. The visitors gathered around the simple but dignified stone marker, which bore an engraved image of a luxury car with its hood raised, a farmer's truck parked alongside it. Below the image was an inscription. On this road, a chance encounter between strangers became the catalyst for community renewal. This monument stands as a reminder that the simplest acts of kindness can transform lives in ways we never imagine. Dedicated to the people of Riverdale County, who turned adversity into opportunity. William Harrington, now in his early 60s and recently retired from his position at regional capital to focus on the foundation he'd established, stood beside Ethan as the visitors read the inscription. "Still feels a bit grandiose," Ethan commented quietly. "All I did was fix a car." William smiled, the years having deepened the friendship that had begun so improbably. "And in doing so, you fixed much more. Sometimes it takes an outsider to recognize the significance of what seems ordinary to you." The monument had been William's idea, funded through the Harrington Foundation for Rural Development. His personal commitment to supporting community-based agricultural initiatives throughout the region. What had begun as an emergency program to save specific farms had evolved into a comprehensive approach to rural economic development, with Riverdale County as its showcase example. After allowing the visitors time to appreciate the monument, Ethan led the procession onward to the main event, the dedication of the new center. As they approached the modern complex at the edge of town, its sustainable architecture blending harmoniously with the agricultural landscape, Ethan felt a familiar mixture of pride and disbelief that all of this had grown from his homemade irrigation system. The parking area was already filled with local residents gathered for the ceremony. Farmers whose properties had been saved by the program stood alongside business owners who had benefited from the community's revitalization. Students from the agricultural program at the State University, many of whom had chosen to study there specifically because of the Riverdale model, helped direct the arriving dignitaries. Robert Mitchell, now in his early 60s but standing straighter than he had 3 years ago when foreclosure loomed, greeted visitors at the entrance. As chair of the center's Community Advisory Board, he had become an eloquent advocate for the integration of traditional farming wisdom with technological innovation. "There's my son," Robert announced proudly as Ethan approached with William, "the mechanical genius who saved our farm and changed how we think about water conservation." Ethan embraced his father, still uncomfortable with such praise, but no longer embarrassed by it. "Just carrying on the Mitchell tradition of being too stubborn to give up," he replied with a smile. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, giving Ethan time to check that everything was in place. As he walked through the center's main exhibition hall with William, they paused before a display that always drew emotional responses from visitors. The Riverdale Renaissance. The exhibit documented the county's journey from agricultural crisis to innovative revival through photographs, data visualizations, and testimonials. Central to the display was a before and after satellite image showing the transformation from brown, drought-stricken fields to the vibrant patchwork of diverse crops now characterizing the region. "Still amazing to see it from this perspective," William commented, studying the images. "The visible proof of what's possible when financial decisions account for community value, not just quarterly returns." "Speaking of community value," Ethan said, "have you had a chance to review the expansion proposals from the eastern counties?" William nodded. The Foundation Board approved funding for the initial assessments yesterday. If the resource mapping confirms our preliminary data, we could expand the program to cover another 15 counties within 2 years. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Sarah Lawton, the agricultural researcher whose car had overheated on County Road 8 3 years earlier, on the very night of the first anniversary celebration. That chance encounter had led to her joining the Innovation Center's research team, where her expertise in soil science had complemented Ethan's mechanical innovations. Their professional collaboration had gradually evolved into a personal relationship, and they now shared a renovated farmhouse not far from the Mitchell property. The governor's motorcade just arrived, Sarah informed them, and the international delegations are all seated. We should start moving people in for the ceremony. The main auditorium of the Harrington Mitchell Center filled quickly as visitors found their seats. The stage featured a simple podium, flanked by 2 symbols of the center's philosophy, an antique hand plow representing agricultural heritage, and a modern soil monitoring device symbolizing technological innovation. The ceremony began with brief remarks from various officials, each highlighting different aspects of the center's impact: economic revitalization, water conservation, sustainable farming practices, and rural community development. Then, Melissa Chambers, now Senior Vice President of Sustainable Investments at Heartland, introduced the main speakers. It's my honor to welcome to the stage the 2 individuals whose unlikely partnership created the model we celebrate today, William Harrington and Ethan Mitchell. As they approached the podium together, the audience rose in a standing ovation that reflected the deep appreciation for what their collaboration had achieved. When the applause finally subsided, William spoke first. 3 years ago, I was a banker with an impressive title, making decisions based on spreadsheets and productivity metrics, he began. I thought I understood rural economics until my car broke down on County Road 8 during a thunderstorm. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. What I learned through that chance encounter, and through the generosity of the Mitchell family in offering shelter to a stranger, changed not just my professional perspective, but my understanding of what truly constitutes value. He went on to describe how the Agricultural Heritage Preservation Program had evolved from an emergency measure to save specific farms into a comprehensive model for rural development that balanced economic viability with community sustainability. The results spoke for themselves. Foreclosure rates in participating counties had dropped by 78%. Agricultural productivity had increased despite continuing drought conditions, and rural population decline had not only halted, but reversed, as young people found reasons to remain in or return to their communities. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he still showed traces of the shy mechanic who had never sought the spotlight. But his passion for the work overcame his natural reticence. I'm a farmer and a mechanic, not a public speaker, he began, earning knowing smiles from those who had worked with him. But I've learned that sometimes the most important repairs can't be made with wrenches and screwdrivers. Sometimes they require us to reconsider the entire system and how its parts work together. He spoke about the integration of traditional farming knowledge with innovative conservation techniques, emphasizing that the center's approach wasn't about replacing the old with the new, but finding the optimal balance between heritage and progress. Most importantly, he highlighted the collaborative nature of the effort. Farmers working with researchers, financial institutions partnering with community organizations, businesses supporting agricultural innovations that ensured regional stability. What we're dedicating today isn't just a building or a research facility, Ethan concluded. It's a testament to what becomes possible when we recognize that the most valuable assets in any community are the connections between people who care about its future. The ribbon cutting that followed was deliberately designed as a community event rather than a VIP photo opportunity. Alongside the governor and distinguished guests stood farmers whose properties had been saved by the program, local business owners who had benefited from the regional revitalization, and students training to implement similar approaches in other communities. As the ceremony concluded and guests began touring the facility, Ethan found a quiet moment with William in the center's garden, where experimental plots demonstrated water-efficient landscaping techniques. "Did you ever imagine that? Fixing my car would lead to all this?" William asked, gesturing toward the bustling center. Ethan shook his head. "I was just trying to get through one more day, keep the farm going one more week. The idea that it would create this?" He gestured to encompass not just the center, but the revitalized community beyond. "That wasn't even conceivable." "There's a lesson in that, I think," William reflected. "We never know which of our actions might be the pebble that starts an avalanche of change. Every kindness has potential beyond our imagination." As they rejoined the celebration, a young farmer approached Ethan, one of several who had received mentoring through the center's agricultural entrepreneurship program. "Mr. Mitchell," the young man said with evident respect, "I just wanted to thank you. The irrigation system you helped us implement saved our farm this season. We had our best yield despite the drought." "Glad it's working for you," Ethan replied, with genuine warmth. "Any adjustments needed for your specific soil conditions?" As they fell into a technical discussion about soil moisture sensors and water flow rates, William watched with satisfaction. The real success of the program wasn't measured in ribbon cuttings or official recognitions, but in these everyday conversations. Farmers helping farmers, knowledge flowing freely, communities supporting each other's survival and success. Later, as the event wound down and the visitors began departing, Ethan and his father stood on the center's observation deck, overlooking the patchwork of fields stretching to the horizon. The Mitchell farm was visible in the distance, its distinctive conservation systems glinting in the late afternoon sun. "Your mother would have been proud," Robert said quietly, "not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." Ethan nodded, his thoughts turning to the chain of events that had led to this moment. It's strange to think that if it hadn't rained that night, if William's car hadn't broken down exactly where it did, if I hadn't happened to drive by at that moment. "Life turns on small moments," Robert agreed, "but it's what we do with those moments that matters." As they made their way back to the celebration, Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification. The regional emergency management system was alerting all residents about a severe storm approaching the county, not unlike the one that had stranded William Harrington 3 years earlier. "History repeating itself," Ethan commented, showing his father the alert. Robert smiled. "Maybe some other stranded motorist will get lucky tonight and find someone willing to stop and help." "In Riverdale County, definitely," Ethan replied with certainty. "That's who we are now. That's the real legacy of all this. Remembering that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply stop and ask someone if they need help." As if to emphasize his point, the Riverdale emergency alert included a notice that hadn't existed 3 years ago. Volunteer roadside assistance teams activated for the duration of the storm. If stranded, call community dispatch. The innovation that had begun with irrigation systems and water conservation had expanded to include something less technological, but equally vital: a community-wide commitment to ensuring that no one faced life's storms alone. From sustainable agriculture to sustainable community, the principle remained the same. The health of each part contributed to the resilience of the whole. As evening approached and rain began to fall, the lights of the Harrington Mitchell Center For agricultural innovation glowed like a beacon across the countryside, a physical reminder that the darkest storms sometimes lead to the most unexpected blessings, and that the simplest acts of kindness can sometimes repair far more than just a broken-down car. In Riverdale County, that lesson had become more than just an inscription on a monument. It had become a way of life. If this story touched your heart, be sure to subscribe for more remarkable tales of how small acts of kindness can transform lives and communities. Drop a comment below, sharing a time when someone's unexpected help made a difference in your life, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live ourselves. Until next time, remember that the most meaningful repairs often happen, not with tools, but with compassion. Thanks for watching.